Let's talk a little bit more about the Supreme Court session that just ended and bring in legal affairs correspondent for NPR, Nina Totenberg. Nina, there were so many parts of this session that were just absolutely fascinating to me. I look at the Philly case regarding adoption, same-sex adoption. Could have very easily been a blistering 5-4 Alito opinion. Instead, Amy Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh decided to follow Chief Justice Roberts. It was a much more muted, unanimous opinion. You could find other evidence of that throughout the term. But of course, yesterday, a 6-3 split, the type of 6-3 split that many people feared when Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed. Let's talk about yesterday's case first, and if it was much of a surprise to you, and then go over the entire term. What do you think?
Well, I think this was sort of a getting to know you term. We have 3 Trump appointees who have been appointed in the last 3 years, really, 3.5 years. And there we are with a relatively younger new court, 6 conservatives of varying stripes, but all very conservative, and they're sort of feeling each other out. But I had this sense, while some of my colleagues were writing, oh, look, it's much less conservative than we thought, and they can find common ground. I had this sense all during the term that they are driving a pretty conservative car, and they're just in first gear. We haven't seen what it's like when they move into second, third, and fourth gear. And this is, you're going to see a court that's considerably more conservative than this country has seen in many, many, many decades. I mean, probably ultimately back to the 1930s. And the voting cases and the disclosure case yesterday about disclosing large donors to nonprofits, those cases, I think, are an indication of where we're going, and that we're going to see something very much more conservative.
Well, looking at where we are and where we've been so far, there's Gorsuch, whose legal defining of the word sex actually gave the LGBTQ community perhaps their greatest legal victory last term. This term, we had once again to Republican and conservatives' consternation. The Roberts Court once again saving the Affordable Care Act in a way that drove Justice Alito up the wall. What accounted for those 2 rulings, which are 2 of the more fascinating rulings so far this year?
Well, I really don't know. A smart conservative scholar who thought that they wouldn't uphold the ACA. This was the 3rd challenge. It was, in the view of some very conservative people, a sort of frivolous challenge. And the fact that it got any traction at all in the lower courts was a surprise to a lot of people. So that didn't surprise me at all. The Philadelphia case did somewhat surprise me, because this is a court that is very big on the free exercise of religion clause, and I expect the court will expand that more and more. But they held their fire in the Philadelphia case. They ruled for the Catholic charity that wanted to be able to not screen LGBT couples and had a contract with the city to say you can't discriminate. So, we've gone from a period of time in which the court was very much an advocate of separation of church and state to a court that's much more an advocate of the free exercise of religion clauses of the Constitution. And that's going to provide some clashes. Ironically, this was a case in which conservatives of a certain stripe wanted to overturn an opinion by Justice Scalia, a conservative icon who wrote an important opinion years and years ago that said, if a law is generally applicable and neutrally applied, we don't come in and say it's unconstitutional. You can't run a country by saying there are religious exceptions to everything. And but that there was a lot of push to overturn that, and that didn't happen. It was the dog that didn't bark.
There's been so much talk from certain people on the media landscape and on the political right about a war against religion. Can you talk briefly about how the Philadelphia case showed once again that over the past 10 years that the Roberts Court has actually moved, and again, the Philadelphia case was a 9-0 decision, but have moved further to protect religious liberties and religious freedoms than perhaps any other court, at least in the past century.
Well, it has, and I think this court very much reflects the views of the base of the Republican Party, for instance, which is that their view is that the free exercise of religion has been discriminated against. And there is within the conservative wing of the court some disagreement on that. And you saw that in the COVID cases where churches kept coming up to the court and saying they're telling us we can't go to services, or we're going to go to services, we can only have a limited number of people, or we can't sing, or we have to wear masks. And that's a violation of our free exercise right. And before Amy Coney Barrett joined the court, there was a 5-4 majority that said, in the interest of public safety, states and local governments have the right to make these kinds of judgments in the middle of a pandemic. Once she joined the court, and Justice Ginsburg had died, the court flipped, and it was 5-4 the other way, with the Chief Justice in the minority.
Hey, Nina, it's Jonathan Lemire. I'm tempting the news gods here, I recognize, but it's the end of the Supreme Court term, which means the beginning, intensification of the speculation about the future of the Supreme Court, and in particular, Justice Breyer, who many people believe may be eyeing retirement in the semi-near future. According to our reporting, the White House certainly doesn't have any heads up that one thing is coming one way or the other. This is being held very tightly, a close hold, tightly to the justice's vest as to what his future plans are. What is your sense of it? What is your sense of what he may decide, whether it's this year or next year? We know he's come under increasing pressure from some liberals who want him to step aside before the midterm elections, before the Democrats potentially could lose control of the Senate for the confirmation. But it's not just about Justice Breyer's health. It's also about the health of those aged Democratic senators who perhaps, if one of them were to pass on and a Republican governor appointed a replacement, that would change the dynamic of the Senate altogether. Give us just your sense as to where this goes, what we could be looking at, and who President Biden might be looking at for a successor, if he's given a chance to appoint one.
You know, I think it's really always very difficult to read the mind of a Supreme Court justice at a time like this in his or her life. I have no idea is the truthful answer. Justice Breyer is about to turn 83. He's one of the most fit 83-year-olds you can see. He, this term had a very good term. He wrote some very important opinions and managed to get good majorities for them. And that's one of the things he's good at. And he knows he's good at that. On the other hand, he's not a political idiot. He worked in the Senate. He worked for Ted Kennedy. He was chief counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee. Or maybe he wasn't chief counsel and he had some staff director. I don't actually know what his title was. But he's worked there. Now, it was a different Senate in those days.